Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone, and welcome to the 18th episode of the Rolling Stone, which is where I give my initial thoughts and impressions on items and stories currently in the news cycle. And I'm sure that you all know that the big news this past week were the shootings in El Paso, Texas, and in Dayton, Ohio. I'm not really going to say much about them specifically today. I'm saving that for our regular On the Stone video on Tuesday, where I'm going to have several things actually to say about those shootings. But I wanted to take the time at the beginning of this video to not really talk about a story, but to talk about it's more of a vice-like grip that the left has put people in, okay, which even if white supremacy was on the rise in the United States and in the West, like the left says, the left has made it almost impossible for us to actually defeat white supremacy. So, with these shootings in El Paso and in Dayton, the left has just gone full steam ahead, damn the torpedoes, full steam ahead, and said this is all Trump's fault. Because not only is Trump fanning the flames of racism, but he's a white supremacist himself. And they've kind of tiptoed through the tulips in that for the last couple of years, and now they're just saying it bluntly, right? All pretense is gone. So, according to The Hill, presidential candidate, former Vice President Joe Biden, he said this, quote, "Indeed, we have a president with a toxic tongue who has publicly and unapologetically embraced the political strategy of hate, racism, and division," unquote. And then he went further and said that Trump has more in common with George Wallace than he does with George Washington. George Wallace was the governor of Alabama during the Civil Rights Movement, and he actually ordered the police and the fire departments of Alabama to use the fire hoses and the police dogs to disperse civil rights marchers. Okay, that is George Wallace's place in history. So according to Joe Biden, Trump has more in common with George Wallace than he does with George Washington. But it's not just Trump who is a white supremacist. If you are a Trump supporter, you also are a white supremacist. CJ Werleman from Forward.com said this: "Put simply, he, Trump, ain't selling what his supporters aren't buying. And what they're buying is his racist discord and xenophobia, which is measurably and demonstrably getting Americans killed," unquote. Okay? So, doesn't matter why you're supporting Trump. The only possible reason that you have is that you are a white supremacist and that you love his racist dialogue. Okay? That would be bad enough, okay? But maybe, maybe you're not a Trump supporter, right? Maybe you're a never Trumper. Maybe you're saying, right, I voted for him, but really he's turned me off. I'm not voting for him again, okay? So maybe you're thinking, okay, you know what? That doesn't apply to me. Well, sorry, guys, because according to AOC, just the mere fact of being Caucasian and being born in the U.S. means that you are a white supremacist, or at the very, very least, you have strong tendencies to white supremacy, okay? AOC on Twitter, she created a thread where she said that she distinguished between white nationalists and white supremacy. White supremacy is the virus, okay? White nationalists are the people who are now unsavable, who have been infected by the virus. But like any sort of virus, it can attack anyone at any time, right? And we never know where it's going to strike next. So, it's not just a problem with white nationalists, it's a problem with this, very vague term about white supremacy. Because then she goes on saying that white supremacy is the original sin of the United States. This is what caused slavery, Jim Crow, the attacks against the Indians, as well as send her back. She had to get that in. And denouncing it, she says, will be hard because it requires us to quote unquote confront ourselves. Okay? And then she said this: recognizing white supremacy in ourselves, our institutions, our subconscious, our own past remarks or acts, no matter how consciously unintentional. Now, I don't know how something can be unintentional and conscious at the same time. But the gist of what AOC is saying, at least from what I understood when I was reading through this thread on Twitter, is that if you're white, if you were born in the United States, you just have a subconscious attraction to white supremacy. Subconsciously, you are a white supremacist, whether you realize it or not. So you can do something that is totally reinforcing white supremacy, even if you are completely ignorant of the fact and didn't intend it, okay? And so that's why it's like a virus, because it's infected all of us. It just hasn't reached peak stages yet, as it has with white nationalists. So Trump is a white supremacist. If you support Trump, no matter what your reasons are for it, you're a white supremacist. And even if you are Caucasian, born in the United States, probably just born in the West, you also are a white supremacist. So that is the breakdown of the left. That is sort of the ground rules that the left has written after El Paso and Dayton. And just for a second, I am going to accept all that as 100% true. I don't believe it, but I'm going to accept it as 100% true. In order to say this, okay? Because even if the left was 100% right about all of this, about Trump, his supporters, and just, Caucasian people in the West today in general, what the left has also done is made it impossible for people to actually fight against it, okay? You can't confront yourselves. We can't confront ourselves, like AOC says, because of the left's, one of their favorite paradigms, intersectionality. Okay, we've talked about intersectionality a little bit before here on the channel, and intersectionality is the idea that your color, your sex, your sexual orientation, your quote-unquote gender, your socioeconomic status, all of these things work together to put you in certain pigeonholes, in certain categories, right? And certain categories are more oppressed than other categories. So of course, the more oppression that your group has, then of course the more the more that society has to do to make that up against you, right? This is why we have to destroy the patriarchy, destroy really the constitutional system itself. We have to, destroy the heteronormative mindset that our culture has, etc., 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 right? Well, that also means that if you are part of one of these groups, then there is absolutely no way for you to break out of that group, okay? What the left has said, or what the left is moving towards saying, is that, for example, I, as a Caucasian man, 30 years old, I have absolutely almost nothing in common with someone who is black, someone who is gay, someone who is a woman, definitely someone who is a trans woman. I have absolutely nothing in common with them, and as such, I have absolutely no way of understanding their lives, their history, their traditions, their stories, or anything like that. There is a high and impenetrable wall between the group that I'm in and the groups that they are in, okay? There is absolutely nothing at all that I can do to actually breach that gap. Now, we could say that we could use our imaginations, right, to actually bridge that divide, to break down that wall through movies, through television, through books, short stories, just through storytelling. Because in storytelling, we can put ourselves in the place of someone who is not us, right? Whether that story, again, is written or if it's on Netflix or if it's on the big screen. We can we can do that, because the purpose of a story is to actually not just to take us to different places or different times, not just to experience different things that we might never actually experience, but also to hear other people, okay? to hear other people, their points of views, their stories, their culture. That's the whole reason why the writer Toni Morrison is being lauded today, after she died at 88, because she gave black writers a place at the table, right? She wrote her stories about black people, and she wrote them in the language of black people. That is one of her huge claims to fame. But the left is actually waging a war against imagination. I mean, that seems weird, right? We hear about the left waging a war on Christmas, waging a war on the Constitution, waging a war on the family and traditional family values, etc., etc. But I'm saying that they are also waging a war on the imagination. So I've got two examples of this. Last year, Scarlett Johansson, Black Widow, she was set to play a transgender character in a movie I think that was called Rug and Tug, okay? And the Enlightened just absolutely went bonkers about this, saying that it was disgraceful that Johansson, as a white, attractive, female, successful actress, would actually play this part, because she had a myriad of acting opportunities and possibilities, whereas other people, like trans actors and actresses, didn't have as many opportunities. So Johansson actually did a Mario Lopez. She went out, she didn't accept the role, she publicly apologized, but then last month in July, in an interview with As If magazine, Johansson actually kind of punched back, right? Johansson strikes back on this idea, because she said, quote, as an actor, I should be allowed to play any person or any tree or any animal, because that is my job and the requirements of my job, unquote. And the woke, again, the enlightened, they just went bonkers. They were really attacking Johansson for daring to say that as an actress, she should be able to play whatever role she wants, because that is actually the definition of acting, portraying people who you are not. That is the definition of acting, and in fact, that's the definition of writing too. Imagining yourself in different situations and in different circumstances, imagining characters who are different from you. That's the whole point of storytelling, one of them. Okay? But that is now taboo in the new parameters of the left. You cannot use your imagination to either play a role that is not like you, intersectionally speaking, or you cannot write a story or anything like that that also breaks that rule. So if you are, and this is actually happening in the publishing world, if you are, for example, a Caucasian woman, you can't write about, Iranian immigrants. You can't, because you've just broken the bounds of intersectionality. Think about all the people the real Iranian immigrants who could have written about their experience, but who now aren't going to be able to, because you so selfishly actually wanted to give their voice a place at the table, and you wrote about it instead. And the worst thing about this is that there isn't even a back door where we can actually legitimately expand our imagination so that we can do this. I have another story. This is from March, from Vox, where a woman who belonged to an online sewing group, okay, a sewing group, she went to the comments of the group to express her just absolute excitement because she was actually going to be able to go to India. She had dreamed about going and visiting India since she was a child. She had been fascinated with India for the longest time, and she was finally going to be able to do it. She said, I feel like I've won the proverbial trip to Mars. And everyone was happy for her, excited about it, and then came the orders from the top that this was unwoke, that this was actually oppressive. And I kid you not, people actually replied to this woman in the comments of this online sewing group saying that I would really look back at what you said, because this is displaying your colonial and imperialist mindset. A woman who dreamed of going to India to experience India and its people, its history, its culture, its religion, everything, who genuinely loves India and wanted to experience that firsthand, was being told back in March that she couldn't be excited about it because she was just another colonist and imperialist who wanted to exploit the Indians and India for her own selfish gain. In this in this setting probably so that she could feel happy and post a bunch of pictures on Facebook and Instagram. So that is why I said at the beginning that even if what the left said, that white supremacy was on the rise here in the States and in the West, it's impossible. It would be impossible for us to actually combat it, because according to intersectionality, right, the only thing that we can know is the little box that intersectionality has put us in. If we are Caucasian, that means that we are automatically white supremacists. It's subconscious again, remember, like AOC said. But because we cannot imagine what other people's lives and stories are like, and because we can't even go to new places and experience those things, those lives and those histories and traditions, what are we left with? We are left in the box with absolutely no way to get out of it. I keep referring to it as a box, and that's because it really is. It is a box with absolutely no escape. And so this is the dichotomy that the left has put people in. On the one hand, if you are white, you're automatically a white supremacist. However, because you can't use your imagination anymore, because that is colonistic, imperialistic, insensitive, and oppressive, you can't expand your mind to actually combat your white supremacy. So what's left? I really don't know. The left hasn't answered that. But that is the first item on the agenda today. Our second story comes from Teen Vogue, where Angie Jamie wrote about her experience at the Aniwa Gathering in Western Massachusetts. The Aniwa Gathering being a kind of a seminar, a long weekend seminar for Indigenous wellness. Okay, so a bunch of Indigenous people gathering together to display health practices, traditions, and as well as spiritual ones as well. Okay, now Jamie, by her own admittance, claims that she is a mestiza. Okay, a mixed race. She is mixed race from Mexico, Indigenous and Mexican. Now, early on in the piece, she says this: "My abuelos largely lost connection with their Indigenous heritage, either by force or because it simply made an already harrowing life a bit easier." Okay, and she talks about how, her family basically left Mexico at some point in time, and they traveled along the United States, working at whatever they could until they ended up settled in Chicago, which is where she was born. She, according to her website, she was born in Chicago, she moved to Los Angeles, and now she lives in Brooklyn. Okay? Now, because of this, because her family was, for whatever reason, moved from Mexico or moved from the American Southwest, because, before the Mexican-American War, all of the Southwest belonged to Mexico. At some point, for whatever reason, whatever their circumstances, her family moved from the Southwest or Mexico to Chicago. She says that because of this, quote, "I have for these reasons not had access to the traditional ways of life that are bound up in the Indigenous culture that my ancestors might have dreamed for me. I am a product of colonization and of modern migration too. I bear the burden of being born in a place where I am subjected to oppression in exchange for survival. I had no choice in the matter. I was raised in the urban center of Chicago, cut off from Indigenous spiritual teachings, which are as much a part of my heritage as anything else," unquote. Now, later on in the piece, when she's actually describing her time at the Aniwa Gathering, okay, the Indigenous wellness gathering in Western Massachusetts, she says this. She says that she was angered, okay, by what she saw. Quote, "I woke inside my glamorous tent with a renewed anger, surrounded by mostly affluent white guests who, despite their best efforts, betrayed small indicators of wealth and consumption. Middle-aged parents with their beautiful blonde children in tastefully casual non-Western apparel, enormous engagement rings, expensive steel water bottles, almost too quick mentions of their professions or universities, giving away their very privileged real lives. The kind of lives I'd probably never experience," okay, unquote. She says that. And then she gets after them And then she gets after these people too, these same people, for cultural appropriation of all things. She says that the indigenous leaders who were there, they were there for cultural exchange, right? But these other people, you know, these white Western people with their huge engagement rings and their blonde, skinny kids and everything, they were there for cultural appropriation. She says that many people just saw it as a way to disconnect from the hurly-burly of New York for a long weekend. Others, she says, wanted to use these quote-unquote sacred spiritual practices for their own benefit. Okay? So those are just highlights of the piece. You can read the whole thing on Teen Vogue under the category of identity, if you so choose. Now, there are several things that I wanted to say about this. The first thing is that you know, I am sorry from the bottom of my heart that Angie Jamie had to be born in the urban center of Chicago. You know, honestly, there are a lot better places to be born than in Chicago. Although, surprisingly enough, Chicago is not one of the 5 most dangerous or worst cities in the United States. From 1st to 5th, I believe that they are St. Louis, Detroit, Baltimore, Memphis, and Kansas City. Yeah, Missouri is on the list twice. Missouri has the number 1 and the number 5 worst city to live in the United States on the east and the west coast. Must be something in the water. Okay? But this idea, okay, that she has, this anger that she has, that because she was born in the urban center of Chicago, okay, because of all that she is somehow oppressed, that she has been cut off from her indigenous roots, I'm sorry, but I'm not buying it. If you go to her website, if you go to angiejamie.com, you will find out that she is the senior social editor at Vice News, where she oversees editorial social strategy, planning, and production for all social presences in support of audience growth, engagement, and increased traffic to Vice.com and its affiliates across owned social platforms. Okay? So, she is definitely not flipping hamburgers at, you know, some McDonald's or some Burger King somewhere in a ghetto of LA. I mean, she has a very good job. So the very fact that she is complaining that she is the product of oppression and migration, and in fact that, as she says here, that she is subject to oppression herself, it's bogus. Okay? It is completely ridiculous to even write that sentence and then to take just a quick trip to her website and find out, oh yeah, I'm the senior social editor at Vice News. Okay, it might not be the most glamorous job in the world. It might not be the most high-paying job in the world, although she was able to afford the ticket prices for this Aniwa Gathering, which were not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. I honestly don't know how much she paid for her ticket. She says in the piece that a general public ticket cost $2,400. So I don't know if that's what she paid or if she got a discount because she's with Vice News or what. But I mean, it cost at the very least several $100s for her to go to this long weekend at this Aniwa Gathering. And she was able to pay for it. She didn't have to mortgage her house. She didn't have to sell her car. She didn't have to downgrade to a smaller apartment for anything like that, right? So the very fact that she's whining about being a product of oppression and migration, and then that she has been cut off from her indigenous roots, as if this is some sort of cultural conspiracy theory that the white man is just trying to cut her off from her indigenous roots. In the first place, there is such a thing as the internet. And I am guessing that she could have taken, a DNA kit, done some genealogy, gone through old family lore and stories, found out what indigenous people she is from, because she doesn't go into specifics there. She says that she is mestiza, which means indigenous and Mexican, but she doesn't say what indigenous tribe she is a part of. So I'm guessing that if she had wanted to, she could have done research into her family, taken a DNA test, narrowed the field there more carefully, and then, she could have done some research in libraries and on the internet and actually found out what the spiritual practices of that part of her family were. Why she didn't do that, I don't know. But in this day and age, when that is not just, a dream that can never be achieved, but that is a real possibility and a real actual practical thing to do, don't come whining to people in the pages of Teen Vogue saying that there is this vast conspiracy for you, against you to cut you off from your indigenous roots. Do not. It is laughable to the extreme. Okay? And then, she said the whole point of this piece, as I was reading it, was I am a victim. Hear me roar. Not I am woman, but I am victim. Hear me roar. And maybe it was just the week. Maybe it was reading this, after the fallout from El Paso and Dayton, where real people were killed. But I had no tolerance for this piece. Like I said, you were born in the United States of America, which, while not perfect, is still a hell of a lot better than most other places in the world where you could have been born. You were born in the city of Chicago, which, while not the nicest place to be born, is definitely better than a lot of places in the U.S. Not only that, you have had the opportunity and the ability to move not just from Chicago to LA, but then from LA to Brooklyn. So you are not being forced to stay in one place. And then the fact that you actually are one of the big wigs at Vice News means that you are not being oppressed. You are not being forced to live in a hellhole ghetto doing menial work for minimum pay. You're not being forced to do any of that. And if you are upset about not knowing as much as you would like about the spiritual practices of one section of your family, I can get behind that. I can understand that. But instead of saying that it's all a huge conspiracy, again, research and find out what it is on your own. You can do that. It is very plausible, very doable today. So the very fact that she is a victim, when she's not a victim, it cemented this idea in my head that what the left wants, and it's not even what the left wants anymore. It's the virus that they have implanted in our society, that you are a victim. Even when your life is good, you are a victim because you happen to be a mestiza, which I have to mention real quickly. If anyone else said that word, they would be crucified in public. I also have to mention that for all the talk about white people being cultural appropriators, she's just as much of a cultural appropriator as anyone, because she says that she attended an event led by the Huniquan Indians of Brazil and the Hopi Indians from Arizona, which last I looked had nothing to do with Mexico. So that very fact again too, when you are privileged enough to take part in these traditions that are not part of your heritage, but when you can attack other people for doing the exact same thing, add on to the facts about where you were born, how you can travel, and your work, you're not a victim. Which leads me to the whole point. None of us really are victims in this day and age. We can all be the captains of our own ship, and we can all take matters into our own hands. But That is story number 2. And our final story for this episode of The Rolling Stone isn't really a story. This has been kind of a weird episode. Yeah, not many stories this week, guys. But it is a tweet. And it is my reaction to this tweet. Okay? July 31st, someone retweeted it, which is why I just saw it this past week. But July 31st, Carolyn Rothstein, who describes herself as a writer, poet, and performer, tweeted this out, saying, "No thank you, I got it," to the middle-aged white man on the airplane who offered and began to take my suitcase out of the overhead compartment for me was a quickly calculated act of resistance. This is a snapshot, a beautiful, pristine snapshot about how we have politicized everything. Everything today in our culture is political. That's what's happened. Everything is political. And you might be saying, Nate, what's the big deal about this? So she was kind of acting like a jerk. Well, there are deeper implications to this story, because what is politics? You know, we've heard the old motto, politics is the art of the possible. That's true, but politics is also about power. When you win public office, whether that's on local, state, or national level, people, the voters, are basically endowing you with political power, right? We believe that all political power comes from the consent of the governed. It says that in the Declaration of Independence. So if you win an election for some office, that means that the people have given you political power. So that's one reason why politics is about power. Another reason is because when you pass laws, regulations, etc., you also are exerting power, because you are exerting, your will on the rest of the population. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing, because power is like any other force, like water, fire, or electricity. It's good and it's necessary as long as it stays within its parameters and it does what it's supposed to do. When it breaks out of that boundary, like when a river breaks out of its bed, or like when a fire breaks out of the fire ring, or like when electricity, leaves the sky and, strikes a house and blows it up, or a car, or an umbrella metal tip that then kills 5 people at a cemetery during a thunderstorm, that's when it becomes bad. So power in and of itself is not evil or bad. It's how you gain the power and how you use the power that makes it good or bad. Now, if we politicize everything, that means that everything becomes a power struggle. Because of course, if everything, when we're talking about power, right, there is going to be a natural hierarchy between people who have power and people who don't have power. Alexandria Ocasio and I may be equal before God and supposedly before the law, but she is a much more powerful person than I am. She has much more power. Not only is she a member of Congress, but she is also a Latina millennial girl, which means she fits into a very nice category in the intersectional handbook. But because of that, and because she's a congressman, she has an inordinate amount of power in the culture, where she has, several million followers on Twitter alone, okay? And hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. In fact, she is so powerful that the New York Times just ran an opinion piece this past week saying that the squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashid Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley, they are the future of the Democrat Party. Freshman congresswomen, and they are the face of the future of the Democratic Party, okay? That is the kind of power that she has. So there is just a natural hierarchy of power, okay? She's up here. I'm like, you can't see it here on the camera, but I'm like way down there, okay? That's just how power works. There's nothing wrong with that either. But when we politicize everything, okay, like Carolyn Rothstein was doing here, what we're doing is that we're saying is that everything is becoming a hierarchy of power. We are turning everything into people who have power and who are using their power, sometimes to exploit, and people who don't have power. And this is the dangerous thing, because when a simple act of kindness, like this anonymous middle-aged white man, she was very specific about that, when the general common decency acts of kindness, like trying to help a young lady take a suitcase out of the overhead compartment of an airplane, when that is politicized, when that is turned into a power hierarchy and a power struggle, because again, she had to resist his oppressive, his oppressive exertion of his power, that is when we are in deep trouble. Because when simple acts of kindness by strangers becomes politicized, that means that instead of actually seeing that as acts of kindness, seeing that as, oh look, the decency and the goodness of the human soul coming to the fore. There is still good in this world. There is still reason to hope. We're not all, monsters just waiting to come out like El Paso and Dayton supposedly showed us. No, there is hope for the future. But when that is erased, when it's just turned into a power struggle, first of all, how are we supposed to live with one another? How can we tolerate each other and actually coexist side by side with each other when we see everything that everyone does as just an attempt to gain more power for themselves and then to exert that power for their own benefit? And then secondly about that, especially in light of Dayton and El Paso, how are we actually supposed to heal from tragedies like this? I mean, there was a time, long time ago, when mass shootings like this, they were supposed to be a time when people actually forgot their differences and came together. Well, when even a simple act of kindness is just an oppressive exertion of power, that has to be resisted. What's more, how can we actually even heal together? How can we live together? I'm not sure. I'm still struggling with that question. If you have any thoughts about that, please leave them in the comment box, because I would love to hear them. But anyway, going really long this time, gang. Thank you for your patience. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Ciao.